So the first thing that people want to know when they meet me is, how tall are you? I'm 6'6", but I'm 6'9" in heels. And one of the problems with growing up tall and growing up poor is you grow up faster than your family's ability to get you pants. I grew up in a trailer park in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I was always taller than my parents really wanted me to be, and so I was always growing out of my pants faster than they wished that I was. So I always went to school with high water pants, or floods we called them. They were never long enough to make it all the way down to the floor. My mom, though, didn't want me to feel bad, so she told me they were capri pants, and they were coming back in style. That hasn't happened yet, but I'm excited about the possibility. I'm 6'6". My wife is 5'3". This is not us. People have asked that before, but it's representation. If you wonder how that works to have a 6'6" person married to someone who's 5'3", just realize that in our relationship, deodorant is much more important than breath mints. That's what I always call a double laugh, where you get some people get it right away, then other people get it sort of a little bit later. I've been married to my wife for 19 years. This is also not her. It's also not me. I dressed up as a woman. People have asked both of those questions. But it is supposed to be a man dressed up like as a woman for a reason. I've been married to my wife for 19 years. We have 3 daughters. They're 12, 10, and 7. Those are weird names, but we really like them. And what I've realized is living in a house of all women is gradually turning me into a woman. And I wasn't ready right away to join the ranks of womanhood, but they keep inviting me. And so they don't ever just say, hey, Dave, you should join our team. They sort of always give me little subtle invitations. So I remember the first time it happened, I was about to get in the shower, and I noticed there was no soap in the shower. So I asked my wife, hey, do we have any soap? And she said, no, but here's a loofah sponge and some body wash. And at that point, I had a decision to make. Was I going to be a man, or was I going to be clean? And when I chose to be clean, my journey to womanhood began, because it wasn't just any body wash. It was exfoliating body wash. Now, exfoliating sounds kind of fancy in French, but what it really means is removes layers of skin. And I hadn't had all the layers of my skin removed before. But it wasn't just any exfoliating body wash. It was from Bath & Body Works. It was called Warm Vanilla Sugar. Now, I grew up Christian, and I knew it was wrong to be in the shower getting sugar all by myself, but it felt so right. But then my wife came home one time. Somebody loved that one. You can use that. You can use that. There's no extra charge for that. My wife came home one time. I was probably about 30 years old, I remember, and she came home and she said, Dave, do you notice anything different about me? Because women like to test you. And I said, you know, I do. You got your hair cut. It looks lovely. You know, you got it cut and colored, it looks like, and it looks great. Good job. And she said, what else? Because women want you to fail. And I had 100%. I had 100%, and then if I got this one wrong, I'm down to 50%. So she said, what else? And I didn't know, so I said, I love you. And that wasn't it. So she made me keep guessing, and I kept getting it wrong. And finally she said, I got my eyebrows done. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I thought I was a smart person. I was 30 years old. I had a master's degree at the time. I think I was a manager at a company. Thought I was a competent, intelligent person. I had no idea what she was talking about. So what do you mean you got your eyebrows done? She said, you know, they were getting out of control. I said, how exactly do eyebrows misbehave? And she said, you know. And I said, I don't know. I said, what does it even mean to get them done? She said, you know, you get them plucked and you get them waxed and you get them trimmed. I said, I've had these bad boys for 30 years. And they've never given me any trouble. And they never had given me any trouble until I discovered that your eyebrows could give you trouble. And from that day on, I felt like I had 2 wild animals fighting on my forehead every single day. And so a couple years later, I was getting my hair cut someplace fancy called Great Clips. And the lady was cutting my hair, and at one point she finished and she looked at me and she said, would you like me to do your eyebrows? I sort of looked around to make sure no one was watching because I knew it was wrong, but it felt so right. And I said, well, yes, I would. So I know some of you have been checking these out. They've been done. One thing I would warn you about before you do your eyebrows for the first time is realize once you start, you cannot stop. Once you start, you can't stop that. But 3 things about being tall, about being the only man in a house full of women, 3 things that we learn about being different. The first one is that when you're different, people definitely notice. Right? When you're different, people definitely notice. The next thing is when you're different, people notice and they want you to be more like them. They want you to be more like them. They immediately notice, they comment on it, and they invite you to be more like them. When you're different, people notice and they invite you to be like them. And the third thing that happens is we tend to want to accept that invitation because we want to be liked and we want to be accepted. And we think if we become more like those people, more like the people around us, they'll like us better and everything will be better. Robert Quinn said in his book, Deep Change, that deviance will always generate external pressures to conform. If you perform beyond the norms, the systems will adjust and try to make you normal. Deviance will always generate external pressures to conform. As soon as you're different, I did a presentation in Australia. This woman was supposed to show me where to do my presentation. Before she said her name, before she asked my name, she said, "You're too tall." Okay? You're too tall. That's something I can't do anything about. That's something that I didn't choose. And what she was saying was, the fact that you're so much bigger than me makes me feel uncomfortable, and I'd feel better if you weren't so unusual. And that's the kind of response that we get from people. Deviance will always generate external pressures to conform. What I think happens is we tend to take people's difference and we tend to turn it into a weakness. And here's the problem with that. The problem with that is that excellence is a form of deviance. The way to achieve and maintain excellence is to deviate from the norm. It's not possible to be excellent and to be normal at the very same time. So when we try to be unusual, people try to get us to be normal, but at the same time they're trying to get us normal, they're sending us messages that we should be excellent. And we're caught in this tug of war between what we want to be and what other people say they want us to be, and then a different version of what people want us to be. And what some people think is that you can have excellence and you can have normality at the same time. If you fit in, if you follow the rules, if you do what you're told, if you do what's expected, if you do things the way everyone else is doing them, you can have excellence just in some kind of conventional way. But excellence, by its very definition, is a comparative term. Excellence means better than, different than, above the average of everything else. You become excellent because you're doing things that normal people do not want to do. And so that's the tug of war I want to talk about tonight. People who are trying to be excellent, to create an excellent business, to create an excellent family, to create excellent relationships, to be excellent in your own way of living your life, your personal life. And yet that pressure we're going to get when we do those things to try to get us to be normal. So my message tonight is really simple. It's that what makes us weird also makes us wonderful, and what makes us weak also makes us strong. And it's that last part that I think is really important, because I think a lot of people have come to grips with this idea that weirdness and wonderful can go together, that we have to differentiate our business, that being different is good. But here's the problem. I think people, what they do is they don't attack our difference directly. They turn it into weakness. They take that thing about us that makes us unique, and they turn it into a problem. They turn it into a personality flaw that we need to repair. And oftentimes, if you're a high performer, if you're a person who wants to succeed, if you're a person who wants excellence, you take that feedback and you think to yourself, I do need to fix that. I do need to change that. That's a weakness that's going to bring me down, and I want to give you a different perspective tonight. So the first idea is this idea of awakening. So there's 7 steps to what we're going to talk about tonight. And before we get to those, the first one is awakening. Everything we've learned about weakness is wrong. So I want to take you back to the 1960s to a little town called Riceville, Iowa. There's a teacher named Jane Elliott, and she wanted to teach her kids about prejudice and discrimination. The problem was these kids went to an all-white school in an all-white community in basically an all-white state, Iowa, in the 1960s. And so they weren't discriminating against anyone else, at least not based on race, and they weren't experiencing racial discrimination. So she designed an experiment to help them understand what was happening. And so she came in one day and she said, hey kids, I've been reading in the educational journals and I learned something interesting. I learned that kids with blue eyes grow up to be more successful adults than kids with brown eyes, and they're also better students in school. So she divided the class into blue-eyed kids and brown-eyed kids, and she even put yellow paper collars around the brown-eyed kids' necks so people could identify them from a distance. Throughout the day, she gave extra support and encouragement and privileges to the blue-eyed kids, and she ignored and criticized and punished the brown-eyed kids. By the end of the day, the blue-eyed kids' performance had done what? What do you think happened to the blue-eyed kids' performance? It went up, right? What happened to the brown-eyed kids' performance? It went down. And not only did it go down, by the end of the day, the brown-eyed kids were saying, I always knew something was wrong with me, but I never knew exactly what it was. Right? She hadn't just changed their performance. By the end of the day, she'd changed their perception of who they were as people. The next day she came in and she apologized, not for the experiment. She wasn't ready to let them know about the experiment yet. She apologized because she said she'd mixed up the eye colors. She said she went home the night before and she looked at the journals again, and it turns out it's the brown-eyed kids who are going to be successful students and are going to be successful adults, and it's the blue-eyed kids who won't. And so throughout that day, she gave extra support and encouragement and privileges to the brown-eyed kids, and she ignored and criticized and punished the blue-eyed kids. And by the end of the day, the brown-eyed kids' performance had risen dramatically, and the blue-eyed kids' performance had plummeted. And they asked her afterwards to explain what she'd done, and she gave an interesting explanation. She said, I took a neutral characteristic. It's not good, it's not bad, a neutral characteristic over which they had no control, eye color. I took a neutral characteristic over which they had no control, and I attributed negative elements to it. In other words, I took something that wasn't bad, something that they couldn't do anything about, and I told them it was bad. And that's important because I think we repeat another version of Jane Elliott's experiment every day in our homes, in our schools, and our workplaces. We have certain characteristics in this world that we define as effective characteristics, as the kind of characteristics that make people successful, appropriate characteristics, professional characteristics. And if you have those characteristics, you get rewarded and you get encouraged. And if you don't, you get criticized and you get punished. And I think every day in our homes and our schools and our workplaces, we're taking neutral characteristics over which people have no control, and we're attributing negative elements to them. We're missing the best things about people because we're busy finding out what's wrong. When I was a kid, I was a victim of Jane Elliott's experiment every day at school. I was in trouble for three things. I was in trouble because I couldn't sit still, because I couldn't be quiet, and because I couldn't do what I was told. The teachers would call me rebellious, they'd call me obnoxious, they'd call me inappropriate, they'd call me immature, they told me I had no self-control and no self-discipline, and if I didn't fix those things, I was going to end up homeless and living in a van down by the river. Sooner or later, they'd send me to the principal's office. I remember one time I was in third grade, I got sent to the principal's office. I'm 8 years old. The principal sat me down on his lap, which seems questionable now looking back on it. I'm glad to know I'm not the only one who thought that was questionable. He sat me down on his lap, and he told me a story. He said, Dave, there's three kinds of bad people in this world. I'm like, wow, this is a bad story. It only has bad people in it. He said, there's three kinds of bad people in this world. There's bad people, really bad people, and people who are too far gone. Now, I want to comment for a second on intentions, because the principal was trying to help me. I'm not sure about the lap thing, but as far as the advice, he was trying to help me. Now, what he was saying was, Dave, you're on the wrong path. And at the end of the wrong path is a cliff, and if you fall off that cliff, you'll get hurt so badly that you'll never be able to get back on the right path again. Dave, you need to learn to sit still, be quiet, and do what you're told, because that's such a simple, such a basic thing. And if you can't do that, what else are you going to possibly be able to accomplish in this life if you can't do those very, very basic things? Sir Ken Robinson said in his book, The Element, that many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. Let's think about that for a second. They had something they were good at, and that's a positive. But not only did the school ignore it or see it as neutral or fail to acknowledge the positive nature of that characteristic, they actually stigmatized that very thing. What he's saying is that in this world, what I'm saying is that in this world, we look at certain people, certain types of characteristics, and all we see is bad, when in fact it's neutral and it has the potential to be positive. Many highly talented, brilliant, creative people think they're not, because the thing they were good at school wasn't valued or was actually stigmatized. So I got in trouble my whole life because I couldn't sit still, be quiet, and do what I was told. Now I get paid to do three things. I get paid to stand up, not to sit down. I get paid to talk, not to be quiet. And I get paid to run my own business, not to do what other people tell me to do. What I learned was, and I learned it too late, and I wish someone would have told me sooner, what I learned was that every single one of my weaknesses was also a strength. It's not that it wasn't a weakness. It's not that the weakness didn't exist. It's that the weakness was there, but it was also sitting right next to a strength. And I couldn't sit still, and I couldn't be quiet, and I couldn't do what I was told because I was good at standing up, I was good at talking, I was good at doing my own thing, I was motivated to do what I wanted to do, and I had a sense of what I wanted to do, and I wasn't excited about doing what other people told me to do. Every one of my weaknesses was there because of my strengths. And once I discovered that, I wondered if that might be true for other people as well, and that's where the freak factor came from. And that's where I came up with this idea that what makes us weird also makes us wonderful, and that very specifically those things that make us weak might also make us strong. So that's where these 7 steps come from. These 7 steps then come from, okay, if that's true, then what do we do? Right? If that's true, then what do we do? So the first thing is awareness. Weaknesses are clues to our strengths. So one of the reasons we're going to do an assessment tonight is because if we don't know what those strengths and weaknesses are, then we can't possibly do anything with them. One of the reasons, though, we have a hard time assessing our own strengths and weaknesses and assessing other people's strengths and weaknesses is because of something psychologists call negativity bias. Negativity bias says that we tend to see what's wrong instead of what's right in any given situation, even when what's wrong is really, really small and what's right is really, really big. This isn't just some people. This isn't a personality quirk. This is everyone. This is human nature, psychologists explain. So a good example of this negativity bias would be, imagine that tonight when I was having some of the lovely hors d'oeuvres that they brought around, that I spilled, let's say, the Parmesan chicken Parmesan all over the front of my shirt, big spaghetti sauce stain right in the middle of my shirt, big baseball-sized stain. What negativity bias says is that every single person in this room would be staring at that stain and thinking negative things about me as a human being because I don't know how to keep myself clean. What negativity bias also says is that no matter how positive and how encouraging you are, that there's not a single person in this room who'd be looking at that stain during the presentation and thinking to themselves, that Dave Rendall's doing a good job. Because 98% of that shirt is stain-free. Good job, Dave. Good job. And let that sink in for a second, right? Let that sink in for a second, because 98% of the shirt would be stain-free, which means that the vast majority of the shirt was stain-free. So why is it that we focus on what's wrong instead of what's right? At school, if you get a 98% on everything you ever do, you'll have a 4.0 grade point average. You'll have an absolutely perfect GPA. And yet if I have a stain on my shirt, and Karen asked you to rate my appearance at the end of the night, and some of you would not only give me a failing score for 98% stain-free, some of you would give me a 0, even though the shoes go with the pants, and also you may not have noticed the socks. If you need a little confidence boost during the day, these socks say "I'm with awesome," and the arrow points up. Right, just to give yourself a little confidence booster during the day. There's another bias. There's another bias that we have. It's called confirmation bias. What confirmation bias says is that we tend to find what we're looking for. Most of us have experienced this. Raise your hand if you bought a car that's new or new to you in the last couple years. Okay? So you buy a car that's new, you buy a car that's new to you, it doesn't matter. You drive off the lot in your new car, and as you drive around that day, what do you start seeing? All the same cars. At the end of the day, if I asked you, let's say you got a new Toyota Camry. How many Toyota Camrys did you see today? 400,000. Right? How many Honda Accords did you see? Even though the Honda Accord's the best-selling car in America, we tend to find what we're looking for. We tend to see what we're looking for. Negativity bias tends to cause us to look for negative things. And once we start looking for negative things in ourselves and others, we keep finding them. And we say, Dave, see, they're right there. But just like the Honda Accords and the Toyota Camrys, we're missing something that's right there because we're simply not looking for it. Parker Palmer says we're led to truth by our weaknesses as well as our strengths. And I want to show you how you can use your weaknesses to discover your strengths tonight. So everybody has an assessment. It's on the second page of your handout there. It's after the outline. And the first page is about your strengths. Okay? So there's a page that has a list of 52 strengths. Okay? You got a list of 52 strengths. Okay? If you don't have one, maybe look at the person next to yours. It's not something that's mutually exclusive if they'll let you kind of make some scribbles on their page or something like that. They're going to make some. Right? They're going to make some. We can catch up. Okay? So there's 3 things that I want you to do. The first thing is check the box next to your strengths. So there's 52 strengths. Okay? There's 52 strengths. Check the box next to your strengths. Anything that you see of those 52 that looks like a strength of yours, check it off. Then choose your top 5. So look through all the things you've checked off and ask yourself, what are my top 5 strengths? And then at the bottom of the page, there's an opportunity to rank them from 1 to 5. Okay, an opportunity to rank them from 1 to 5. From the list that you've checked off, what's your number 1 strength? Go ahead in the vest. Creative and innovative. Good. All right, right there. Dedicated and persistent. All right, good. Over there. Yeah, you in the suit. Yep. Team player and unselfish. Good. Direct and honest. All right, go ahead. Enthusiastic and passionate. Detail-oriented. Creative and innovative. All right. Oh, good. We got the extra copies coming in. Thanks, Karen. I appreciate that. All right, so now we go to the next one. What are your weaknesses? So you turn to the next page. There's a list of weaknesses. Okay. Same thing, 52 of them, same process. What's nice about this, people love to help with this, right? People love to get involved. If you're here with people you know, they're like, let me just fill it out. Let's be honest. I've already got something on my iPhone where I've got this figured out for you. If you need to text your spouse or something like that, they've got a list at home already. They can be very helpful. So check the box next to your weaknesses, choose your top 5, and then rank them from 1 to 5. Same process. All right, so one of my biggest weaknesses, impatient and impulsive. What about some of you? Raise your hand, tell us what's your biggest weakness. What's your biggest weakness? Go ahead. Indecisive. All right, perfect. Jeff. Disorganized. Hedonistic. That's impressive for knowing that. That's my number one question I get from people is, what does that mean? If you're in EO, you're hedonistic. That's what I've discovered from traveling around EO. There's the dinner. There's the party, there's the after party, then it just keeps going until people can't stand up anymore. And that's what I've seen so far. All right, in the back, go ahead. Impatient. All right, what else? Blunt. Over here. Blunt. All right. Silly. Disorganized. All right, anybody else? Go ahead. What'd you say? Workaholic. That's a great one to admit in an interview, right? Oh, I just care too much and I try too hard. I just give everything I have at the organization. All right, anybody else? All right, go ahead in the back. Quick-tempered and angry. Okay, that's one of my top ones too. All right? All right, so what makes us weird also makes us wonderful. What makes us weak also makes us strong. So how many of you have ever done some kind of personality assessment before? You've done the MBTI, you've done the DISC, you've done anything like that, right? So that's awareness, right? Anything you do along those lines, I would recommend. I think it's fantastic. I don't care which ones you do. I don't care if you do which Star Wars character are you. I think awareness is a good thing. Understanding more about yourself is an advantage. I have a master's degree in psychology, an undergraduate degree in psychology. And I think the biggest benefit of both of those degrees was all of the assessments and all of the self-assessments that I did along the way to learn more about myself. The problem with most self-assessments, in my mind, is not what they teach you about yourself. It's what they tell you to do with what you understand about yourself. How many of you have ever done the DISC? You've done the DISC. All right, lots of people. So the DISC has basically 4 things you can be. You can be a D, I, an S, and a C. We don't have time to go into it. It doesn't really matter. Here's the point. The point is that if you come out as a D on the DISC, when you get done, it will tell you how to be more of an I, more of an S, and more of a C. Well, maybe it's good to be I. Well, if you come out as more of an I, it will tell you how to be more of a C, an S, and a D. If you come out as a C, it will tell you how to be more of an S, a D, and an I. Assessments act as though there's a perfect place that you should be that you're not, and if you could get there, you'd be better off. But anybody who is in that place would be told that they should be something other than what they are. And so the first step after awareness isn't to adapt, it's not to change yourself, it isn't to do something differently, it's what I call acceptance, to understand that weaknesses are strengths in disguise, that we shouldn't be trying to fix these things, change these things. We should be accepting that that's the way that things are. So I want to introduce you to 2 people. The first one is Adventurous Al. Adventurous Al loves to climb up things and jump out of things. Al loves to travel, he's always on a trip, he doesn't have a steady job, he doesn't have his own car, he doesn't own a home, he's always on the move, he only works long enough to make enough money for the next trip. And on one of his trips, he meets a beautiful woman named Librarian Lucy. Now, Librarian Lucy is steady and she's dependable, she's reliable, she has a graduate degree, she has a career, she has a home, she has money in her 401k plan, she has money in savings, and she's steadily working towards the goals that she's set for her life. So Al and Lucy meet on a trip, they fall in love, it's a love story. Why does somebody like Adventurous Al fall in love with Librarian Lucy? Why does someone like Librarian Lucy fall in love with Adventurous Al? Because opposites attract. Why do opposites attract? Because they wish they were the other. Somebody else was saying something about should be. You think you should be that, right? So the other person has something you don't, right? Which isn't everything. We'll get to that in a second, right? If you've got Ebola, right, and I don't want the Ebola, but they have everything that you don't, okay? but that you've been told you should have, right? So you see in the other person everything that you're not, but you've been told your whole life you're supposed to be. Lucy's been told her whole life that she needs to loosen up and have some fun. And that's Al. And Al's been told his whole life that you need to grow up and settle down. And that's Lucy. Each person sees in the other person everything that they're not, but they've been told that they should be. So they meet, they fall in love. It's a love story. We check in with Al and Lucy 5 years later after they get married. How's it going? It's not good. It's awful. There's a divorce with restraining orders in place, okay? Now, why? The why is really important. Sometimes we tell stories like there were things I didn't know and there were things I didn't find out and there were things I only discovered later. Sometimes that's true, but not in their situation. In their situation, something very simple happened. The very characteristics they hoped would rub off on them started to rub them the wrong way. They got exactly what they wanted, and when they got it, they realized they really didn't want it as much. Because people told them they should be that way, and they thought they were supposed to be that way, but it turns out they didn't really want to be that way. And this is all because of something psychologists call framing. At the beginning of the relationship, remember, we have neutral characteristics over which we have no control. It's the way we are. And at the beginning of the relationship, they attributed positive elements to them. Psychologists call that positive framing. They framed that person's neutral characteristics in a positive way. We call those strengths. But over time, they started to frame those same characteristics, not just in a neutral way, but as in a negative way. So first, Lucy did this to Al. She married him because he was easygoing, adventurous, and spontaneous. That sounds good. But after a while, easygoing started to feel like irresponsible. Adventurous started to feel like dangerous, and spontaneous started to feel like impulsive. I was doing this in Australia, and I said adventurous and dangerous, they're the same, and when you take danger out of things, you take the adventure out. And this guy raised his hand. He said, no, you don't. I said, perfect. Give me an example, because I don't care if people argue. That's fine. It means they're thinking about it. So I said, perfect. What's an example? He goes, cage shark diving. I said, you remember when you're arguing, you're supposed to talk about the opposite of what the other person's talking about. That sounds pretty dangerous to me. Have you ever seen the YouTube video of the shark that gets in the cage? That ended badly. Okay? So when you take the danger out of adventure, it ceases to be as adventurous. When you put in things that make it safer, it reduces the adventure. We won't get into that argument. Spontaneous and impulsive, it's easy to show the similarity there. Ladies, if your man comes home, your significant other comes home, and unexpectedly, for no apparent reason, no anniversary, no birthday, no special event, brings you flowers, how lovely, he's spontaneous. If they bring home unexpectedly, no special occasion, a motorcycle, they're impulsive, and they shouldn't do that. They've got a problem. Al did the same thing to Lucy, though. He married her because she was structured, responsible, and cautious. But pretty soon, structured started to feel like inflexible, responsible started to feel like controlling, and cautious started to feel like fearful. The same characteristic that started off as a positive started to feel like a negative. And that's because there is a negative side to every positive characteristic. There's a positive side to every characteristic, or every negative characteristic. Every strength comes with a corresponding weakness. Every weakness comes with a corresponding strength. Another good example of how this works together is being tall. It's good to be tall. Why is it good to be tall? It's good to be tall because scientists have proven over and over again that people think taller people are smarter than they actually are. Every year they do studies and they ask people to rate people's IQ, and they always give the taller people more IQ points than the shorter people. I think we deserve them. Science says I'm wrong. We usually vote for the tallest person for president, so when we have two people to vote for, we almost always vote for the taller candidate. We've only failed to do that twice. And we pay taller people more than we pay shorter people for the exact same work. Again, I think that's fantastic. Other smaller people tend to disagree with me. But it isn't all good to be tall. It isn't only good to be tall. I'm flying to Seattle tomorrow to speak at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. When I fly, and I fly hundreds of thousands of miles every year, when I fly out of Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, which is not a main hub for any airline. So I'm always on a regional jet. I call them toy jets or pretend planes. And in order to get on a regional jet, it starts off badly. The flight attendant sees me. They tell me to watch your head, which is hard to do if you've ever tried. And I get in the plane sort of like this. And some of you are like, yeah, I've ducked before, but you're used to kind of re-emerging on the other side when you duck. There's no re-emerging for me. I just kind of get in like this, and that's that's it. And I kind of shuffle to my seat with my bag dragging along the ceiling as I go. But I fly a lot. I got a first class upgrade on the way here. I might get an exit row. I might get a bulkhead seat. Don't feel bad for me. But sooner or later, I have to go to the bathroom. The problem with the bathrooms are, if I don't fit in the middle of the plane, the bathrooms are always on the side of the plane. If it's hard to imagine just how difficult it is to fit in the airplane bathroom, that's me in an airplane bathroom. To give you a sense of how it doesn't work, that is my left shoulder on the ceiling of the airplane bathroom. That isn't the top of my left shoulder, that is the side of my left shoulder on the ceiling of the airplane bathroom. And what you can't see in that picture, because we kept it clean, kept it above the waist, is that in order for me to even get in the mirror like that, I had to kind of go like this in order to fit in there. So I get into the airplane bathroom and I have work to do. The problem is I'm over here and the toilet is over there. And so I try to do what normal people do, which is to get closer. But the problem is that the ceiling goes like this. So as I try to move closer, it just pushes my face closer and closer and closer to the toilet, and that's not what we're looking for. So I've developed something I call the limbo yoga approach. The key is to keep the upper body back. As you move the upper body in, and then you try to rotate, kind of pivot and bring it in. What I realized is the problem is I'm getting closer, but the right parts are not getting closer. And that's when I realized, wait a second, there is a sink right there. Yeah, that's a whole lot higher and a whole lot closer. That seems custom designed for what needs to happen. What needs to happen here. Some of the ladies are like, hey, Dave, you told us you were turning into a woman. Why not just embrace it? Go ahead and sit down. Okay, good idea. Logistical problem is, though, once I'm in, bathroom door closed behind me, there's no turning around now. So the only way to execute this would be to exit the bathroom and back her in. I'm pretty sure when you're on your flight to Indonesia and there's 6'6" man with his pants around his ankles backing it in to the airplane bathroom, you're not allowed to make your connecting flight. Recently, I did an event, and this woman had seen me do that story more than once, and she told me something that I'm not sure I'm excited about, which is, Dave, every time I'm in an airplane bathroom, I think about you. Maybe that's not the legacy I was hoping to leave there. But then this other guy came up to me the other day. This hasn't happened. I've been telling that story for maybe 5 years. And this guy came up to me. He was about 6'4". I was in Charleston, South Carolina. A guy comes up to me afterwards. He goes, I know exactly what you mean. He goes, I don't even try to go in the toilet anymore. I just take it right out, put it right in the sink, turn on the water. I'm like, you realize I never said I did that, and I don't do that. You're a disgusting, horrible person. We're not on the same team. I don't know. We're not. Back away and wash my hands here. Okay. So what's the moral of that story? There is a moral to that story. The moral of that story is I don't get to accept the advantages of my height without also accepting the disadvantages of my height. Being tall is a strength and a weakness. It's good and it's bad. There's an upside and there's a downside. And just like every other characteristic, it's a strength and a weakness at the same time. And once we understand that dual relationship, once we understand that there's a negative and a positive related to every characteristic that we have, it changes the way we live our lives. It changes the way we parent our children. It changes our relationships. It changes the way we run our companies and manage our people. So what I want you to do is see how that might be true for you as well. So what I want you to do is turn to the next page. The easiest way to do this is to tear your pages apart. Some of you won't be able to handle that, and I understand that. But for those of you who want to be able to do that, that's the freeing way to do it. It's the easiest way to do it. The instructions are at the top of the page. It's really simple. You take your top 5 strengths from the first page and you move them to this chart. They're the same order, the same number, the same everything. You take your top 5 weaknesses, you move them to this chart. They're in the same order, the same number, everything. What you're looking for is a match. Okay? What a match means is that, let's say, for example, you pick number 1, creative and innovative, as a strength, and you pick number 2, chaotic and disorganized, as a weakness. That's a match. When you pick something on the same row with the same number, that's a match. I already heard one of them when people did their biggest strength. I heard direct and honest. I heard blunt and rude. That's a match. Okay? That's a match. And he picked number 31, critical and judgmental, as a weakness. But he hadn't picked the corresponding strength. And when I asked him to do that last part, he looked across and he saw analytical and rational. Now, this guy's in his mid-50s. He's a CEO. In his entire life, he's never framed critical and judgmental as analytical and rational. He's never, nor has anyone else in his life ever framed that as a positive. And yet when he looked at that, analytical and rational, he said, yes, that's exactly right. That's exactly who I am. And that's exactly probably why I've had the success that I've had. So he discovered something positive about himself that he hadn't seen before because nobody had ever framed it that way. So the next thing that I want you to do is if you have things that don't match, let's say you have chaotic and disorganized and you didn't pick creative and innovative. What I want you to do is look across at that strength and say, well, does that describe me or doesn't it? If it doesn't, that's fine. But take a look at what it is and see if that rings a bell for you. Maybe it was the reverse. Maybe you picked organized and systematic. Maybe you picked a strength and you hadn't picked the corresponding weakness. But take a look at the weakness and ask yourself, does that describe me? Has anyone ever described me that way? Is that another way to see myself? So take a second and do that. If you find any additional ones, you can just circle those. I call those secondary matches. Raise your hand if you had at least one match. Leave them up if you had two. Leave them up if you had two. Leave them up if you had three. Leave them up if you had four. So do you see how that works, right? Let's take direct and honest, blunt and rude. We heard that one earlier. I live in North Carolina now. North Carolina, I grew up in Wisconsin. North Carolina is known for politeness. It's the South. What's the downside of politeness? It's oftentimes superficiality and dishonesty. Why? Because we're trying to be nice at the expense of being honest. Is that a chronic problem in New York? Not really. Okay, not really. Okay. Now, in the South, again, it's not a perfect thing. There's a major downside to the politeness. One of the classic phrases in the South that sounds nice but is terrible is called bless your heart. Has anybody ever been to the South and heard anybody say bless your heart? Watch out for it. Bless your heart means you're an idiot, okay? But it's couched in a way to sound nice, to sound kind, to sound friendly. And what they do is they talk about when I was a kid growing up in Wisconsin, I thought the Yankees were a baseball team. I moved down to North Carolina, found out it was a kind of person, and that I was that kind of person. And when you're direct and honest, people don't call you direct and honest. They call you blunt and rude and tell you you're a Yankee and you have a problem and you need to learn how to behave properly. Okay? So what is it rude to be honest? Is it rude to be direct? Yes, right? It's both. Because some people are going to see you as rude when you're direct and honest. But is it superficial to be polite? Yes. Right? You have to decide which weakness you're comfortable with having because every approach has a weakness. Some people are just more comfortable with a different set of strengths and weaknesses than other people are. Okay? So let's look at one of these, for example, creative and innovative. We call creative thinking outside of the box, okay? And those people are oftentimes chaotic and disorganized because they're thinking outside of the box and they never put anything in the box and they don't put things back where they go and they don't play like everyone else plays. Now, what do organized and systematic people do? They put things in the box, they put labels on the box, they put the boxes on shelves, they cross-reference Excel spreadsheets with the inventory of the boxes on the shelves, and they tell you if you ever take anything out of the box, you have to put it back in the box, or if you use it, to let them know that you used it so they can find a replacement. Okay? Are those people ever rigid and inflexible? Absolutely, because part of organization is putting things where they go, putting things back where you got them. Everything has a place, everything has a spot. Is there some inflexibility that comes with that? Absolutely. So here's the problem, and here's why we talk about acceptance. If you are creative and innovative, and you're chaotic and disorganized, and somebody tells you you need to get better, let's say you tried that. So you try to become less chaotic and disorganized. Well, that's organized and systematic. If you really succeeded at that, people would start to criticize you for being rigid and inflexible, at which point you'd say, fine, I'm going to be creative and innovative. At which point they'd criticize you for being chaotic and disorganized, at which point you'd become more organized and systematic. Do you see how this works? Okay. There's no perfect way to be. And because there's no perfect way to be, why not start with, why not choose, why not accept who you already are instead of trading that in for something that you're not? Now, what some people think is, well, Dave, can't we change? Okay? Can't we change? My grandparents are 94 years old. This isn't them, but they're not on the internet. Okay? My grandparents have been married for 70 years. They're 94 years old. They've been married for 70 years. They got married right at the end of World War II. Last summer, I was talking to my grandma, and my grandma was complaining to me that my grandpa doesn't talk to her enough. And my grandma talks to you like she's on the verge of a breakthrough, like grandpa's just about to become the man that she's always wanted him to be. Grandpa also has a program. He just doesn't talk about it. You have to watch him carefully, and Grandpa's program looks like this. Maybe if I stay really quiet and really still, she won't see me. She'll shut the hell up and leave me alone, right? That's Grandpa's plan. Grandpa's waiting 70 years for Grandma to shut up, right? Grandma's been waiting 70 years for Grandpa to talk. Because they both have been taught everything we've been taught, which is you can be whatever you want to be if you just try hard enough and have enough incentive. Okay? And I don't think that's true, because after 94 years, if Grandpa had the ability to be more talkative, he'd be more talkative. And if Grandma had the ability to quiet down, she would have gotten more quiet. I don't think we change that much. I think we can become more of who we are, but I don't think we turn ourselves or anyone else into someone else. I think we can be more of who we are, but I don't think we turn people into someone else. My grandpa isn't trying to punish Grandma by not talking. My grandpa doesn't have much to say. And he's demonstrated that consistently over 94 years of life. Okay? My grandma has a lot to say. Now, ladies, quick tip, and this comes from a female comedian, so this isn't for me, so you can be upset with her if you don't like it, but this is a quick tip to get into the mind of men for a second. When you give most men the silent treatment as a punishment, they're excited about the punishment. They're like, she's not talking anymore. She's finally quiet. I can watch the whole game. I don't even know what's going on. It's not a punishment. They're excited about it. The silent treatment, oftentimes not a punishment. Maybe need to look into that one next time. All right. So I think a good way to understand this is to see that we all have side effects, right? Every medicine has side effects. There's no such thing as a medicine without side effects. We're so used to hearing about side effects. There's dry mouth and diarrhea, whatever. With Viagra, there's blindness, but you're so excited you just don't care. In fact, you're so old, you're like, I don't know, I don't want to see it. I just want to feel it anyway, so I'm blind, that's fine. We'll go with it. One of my favorite side effects comes from GlaxoSmithKline. They have a medicine called Requip. I know that they make Requip because I was doing a presentation at GlaxoSmithKline and I said, hey, do you make Requip? And they said, yes, we do. And I said, well, this next part won't be as funny to you then as it is to everyone else. Because one of the side effects for Requip helps you with restless leg syndrome. It's a legitimate medicine. You can check it out for a legitimate issue, restless leg syndrome. One of the side effects is compulsive gambling urges. It doesn't even sound like a side effect. It doesn't sound like anything that you would normally get from medicine. And I think that's a good way to understand people. Everyone has side effects. There's no such thing as a person without a side effect. And the medicine illustration is helpful because when you try to reduce the side effect of a medicine, the only way to do it is to reduce the benefit of the medicine itself. Peter Drucker said it this way. He said, strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys. Strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys. If you want strong employees, they're going to have strong weaknesses. If you want a strong partner, they're going to have strong weaknesses. If you want strong children, they're going to have strong weaknesses. Strong people always have strong weaknesses too. Where there are peaks, there are valleys. A good illustration of this concept of acceptance is retail, discount retail. Walmart has one big strength, it's low prices. They have a bunch of weaknesses. We'll summarize them with three things: poor service, poor quality, poor design. Go to Target, ladies. What do we call Target? Target, right? We had a couple guys jumping in on that. Nice work. A woman will tell you, I got it from Target, right? A woman will do that. No woman in the history of mankind has ever been like, I got it from Walmart. Check it out, okay? Nobody does that, okay? And nobody does that for a simple reason. Okay? Target has better service, better quality, better design. So if it's so much better, why doesn't everybody shop there? Because the prices are a little bit higher. Okay? So let's go back to Walmart. Let's do what we always do. Let's fix weaknesses. So let's just fix service. And let's pay people more. Let's give them better benefits. Let's hire actually more people so you can find someone when you're at Walmart. Let's give them better training. What's happening to our costs? What's happening to our prices? What's happening to our strength? Okay? As we fix the weakness, we're damaging the strength. Same thing at Target. We've got to lower those prices. If we're going to fix that weakness, we're going to have to sacrifice some service. We're going to have to sacrifice some quality. We're going to have to sacrifice some design. Now, some people say, no, that's not necessarily, you're not going to have to do that. That isn't necessarily a trade-off. So there's a case study that proves it's true, and it's called Kmart. Okay? Kmart was the low price leader. Kmart had the reputation, they had the distribution, they had the locations, they had everything. And when Walmart came to town, all they had to do was lower their prices by a little bit for a little while, and Walmart never would have been able to gain any traction. But they didn't do that. They hired Martha Stewart. Okay? Now, that's before they knew she was a hardened criminal, so it's not really their fault. But what they were trying to do was be a little bit of Target and a little bit of Walmart. They were trying to do the best of both worlds strategy. They were trying to live in a world where we don't have to make trade-offs. They were going to be the place where people get everything. They get low prices, well, not the lowest prices, and cool stuff, but just not the coolest stuff. And Kmart went bankrupt. They went bankrupt because they didn't end up the best of both worlds. They ended up the worst of both worlds. If you want cool stuff and a better experience, you go to Target. If you want to save money and you don't care what happens to you along the way, you go to Walmart. Those are your choices. Okay? And Kmart didn't find a meaningful place in that world. They tried to be in the middle, and they ended up mediocre. They ended up average. And I think that's what we have to decide for ourselves and for our children, for our employees and our businesses. Are we willing to do the things that Walmart does or do the things that Target does? Are we willing to have strong weaknesses? Are we willing to have peaks and willing to have valleys? Or are we going to spend all of our time trying to become everything and end up nothing, end up mediocre, end up average? I did this presentation for the Gathering of Titans group that's a part of EO that meets at MIT every year. Earlier this year, that's where I met Karen. That's how I ended up here. And the next day after my presentation, this woman named Frances Fry from Harvard Business School got up and talked about her book, Uncommon Service. And she got up, and the first words out of her mouth were, if you want your business to be the best at something, you have to decide what you're going to be deliberately bad at. If you want your business to be the best at something, you have to decide what you're going to be deliberately bad at. Not accidentally bad. The we suck and we're not sure why and we're trying to fix it isn't the same. But choosing that there are things. Walmart is deliberately bad at all those things I talked about. If someone comes to a Walmart store and complains that there wasn't really good service, nobody goes, you know what, we're going to hire more people to help you out with that. In fact, they'd probably have a hard time finding someone to complain to with their problem in the first place. So what makes us weird makes us wonderful. What makes us weak also makes us strong. Everyone has peaks and valleys, strengths and weaknesses. The next step is appreciation, to see that we succeed because of our weaknesses, not in spite of them. I'm going to give you just one example for this to hopefully make it clear. This quote from George Eliot's a good start. Every limit is a beginning as well as an ending. Every limit is a beginning as well as an ending. And I want to show you the beginnings that come with the limits that we have. Most of the time we think of limits as a bad thing. I'll show you how there actually can be a positive. One of the limits that people have is dyslexia. Dyslexia means you mix up your letters, you mix up your words, and that makes it hard to read sentences, hard to write paragraphs. If you struggle with reading and writing, you struggle in school. If you struggle in school, you're supposed to struggle in life, which is why it was surprising in England when they were looking at a group of millionaires studying what it takes to be a millionaire, and they discovered halfway through the study that 50% of the millionaires had dyslexia. They were doing another study in the United States and discovered that 33% of the entrepreneurs in their study had dyslexia, even though only 10% of people in the general population have dyslexia. Ingvar Kamprad is the billionaire founder of IKEA. He has dyslexia. Richard Branson is the billionaire founder of the Virgin series of companies. He has dyslexia. But some of you might be thinking, and the story we've been told is, yes, and those people overcame that difficulty, and their ability to overcome, to tackle, to fix the weakness is what made them successful. But they asked Richard Branson that exact question, how has dyslexia affected your success? And he said, strangely, I think my dyslexia has helped. I succeeded because of dyslexia, not in spite of it. Scientists suffer from negativity bias, and when there's a disability, scientists ask one question, I wonder what else is wrong with people with dyslexia. But when scientists accidentally discovered that millionaires have dyslexia more than most other people do, when they discovered that entrepreneurs have dyslexia more than most other people do, they started asking themselves what might be good about people with dyslexia and about having dyslexia. And they discovered something interesting, which is that people with dyslexia don't have broken brains, they have different brains. And the same brain that causes people to struggle at school helps them to succeed in real life at a higher level than most other people ever will. There's a weakness connected to a powerful strength. What makes us weird also makes us wonderful, and what makes us weak also makes us strong. They talked to another billionaire I'm going to introduce you to later who had dyslexia, and his quote is, I think everyone should have dyslexia. So the next step is amplification. If I really believed it was good, I'd be turning up the volume instead of turning it down. One of the most obvious ways that people try to get us to be less of who ourselves is they ask us just to tone it down. Yeah, it's a good thing, just a little less, right? A little less. But I think we should exaggerate weaknesses instead of eliminating. I think we should turn the volume up instead of turning it down. This is Jimmy Kimmel. He's a late-night talk show host. He's basically a comedian. He was recently asked to host the White House Correspondents' Dinner, very prestigious black tie affair with lots of famous and successful people there. At one point in the evening, he walked up to the podium and he said, "I just want to thank Mr. Mills, my 10th grade history teacher, who told me I'd never amount to anything if I didn't stop screwing around. Mr. Mills, I'm about to high-five the President of the United States of America." And then he did, putting this woman in the most awkward picture of all time. And then he came back to the podium and he said, "Suck it, Mills." Right? Now, I'm not here to be down on teachers, although it sounds like some of you needed that therapy there for a second. I'm not here to be down on teachers, but Mr. Mills, okay, Mr. Mills gave him bad advice. Mr. Mills gave the same bad advice that most people give with the best intentions, which is that's never going to work out for you. If you would stop screwing around, then you would find success. But Jimmy Kimmel found success not by stopping, but by amplifying, by becoming more silly, more ridiculous, more childish, more immature. That's how we ended up high-fiving the president at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. A few years ago, I ran a 40-mile ultramarathon. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You don't look like you're running marathons. And that's because I talked to the doctor, and the doctor said you shouldn't run with the baby, so we're waiting until the baby's born. And then we're going to start running it. It's been about 4 years, so we're hoping for a boy, a really big boy. So I ran a 40-mile ultramarathon. My brother-in-law came out after I finished. He said, "Dave, you are crazy and awesome." And I think in order to be awesome, we have to be willing to be a little bit crazy. There was a philosopher named Seneca who said there's no great genius without a touch of madness. But the problem is when confronted with genius because of negativity bias, we tend to see and other people tend to see madness. There's another interesting thing about the 40-mile race story because my brother-in-law was praising me for something. He was praising me for being very, very, very active, which is interesting because my entire life I've been very, very, very active. But when kids are in school and they're very, very, very active, what do we call it? We call it ADHD, and we give them medicine that fixes them and makes them more compliant at school. When I ran 40 miles, when I became very, very, very active as an adult, when I took my activity level beyond where most people would ever reach, I was praised and rewarded for the very thing that I used to be criticized and punished for. I think oftentimes we're right on the verge of having our biggest success, except the problem is the advice we're getting from other people is to take a step back, to slow down, to stop being so much of this and be more of something else. And that's exactly when we need to move forward. That's exactly when we need to go pro in the very area that people are telling us not to do. I don't like to tell my story as the whole story because I think there's so many other examples. But it does mean a lot to me. One of my goals was to speak on every inhabited continent. The Penguins don't have a lot of conferences. And earlier this year I spoke at 4 chapters in India for EO and 1 in Nepal and checked Asia off the list and spoke on every inhabited continent. Last year I was able to buy my parents a house with the money that I make as a speaker. I spent my whole life getting in trouble for something until I went pro at it, at which point people started paying me to do the very thing that people used to try to stop me from doing. And that's my wish for other people, that those things that we're trying to fix, those things that we're trying to stop, those things we're trying to change are oftentimes our biggest asset. We just can't see it. We're just missing it, and that's exactly what we need to capitalize on. So how can you amplify your weakness? What makes us weird also makes us wonderful. What makes us weak also makes us strong. Now, amplification is important, but we need to find the right spot to do it in. One of the bad questions that we ask about other people and that we ask about ourselves is, how can I fit in? How can I make myself fit into this situation? Now, some of you might say, I'm not doing that. Dave, I'm obviously a business owner. I don't have to fit. I run the company. That's not true at all. You're not trying to get yourself to fit a job that someone else created. You're trying to get yourself to fit a job that you created, and oftentimes it's a job you don't like. One of the biggest things that I see, and if you read stories about successful companies, is there's always a point where somebody gets to the point where it stops being a startup and it starts being a business, where it stops being new and it starts being something that needs to be more efficient, more detailed, more operational, And you have two choices. You can grow up and try to be that person. That's what we think. Or you can fail because, boy, you just weren't able to be an adult like everybody else is, right? And be a professional manager. But the skills of a professional manager are dramatically different than the skills of a successful entrepreneur. And I think alignment is about realizing if we've gotten to that point and asking ourselves, should I just stop at this point, sell the business, or hand it off to a professional manager and turn around and do it again? And then stop and then turn around and do it again. We're always trying to fit into other situations, or almost always, instead of trying to find the right fit. So when I was a kid, my parents not only sent me to school with capri pants, but they also sent me to school with patches on my pants, and I decided if my parents couldn't take care of me, I'd do it myself. So I was delivering newspapers at 5 o'clock in the morning to make money when I was 12 years old, and I fell off my bike. And I started trying to pick up the newspapers, and I went to pick up the newspapers with my left arm, except it wasn't there. It wasn't where it was supposed to be. And I looked around to find it, and sure enough, it was there, except it had broken in half at the forearm and was sticking up at a 90-degree angle to the rest of my arm. They took me to the hospital. They didn't want to do surgery because I was so young, so they put me in traction and fixed it manually, and then they put me in a cast for 3 months. And after 3 months, I got out of the cast, and I thought I was fine. Until 8 years later, when I was in college and I was trying to play the guitar, and a friend was trying to show me how to play the guitar. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't put my fingers on the strings properly. And that's when I realized that they put me back together wrong 12 years ago. When they put me back together, they put me back together a little crooked. You should be able to do this. You should be able to turn your hand flat in both directions. I can do that with my right arm. I can't do it with my left arm. I can only turn it about halfway. And that's when I realized why I'd struggled at the drive-thru for so many years. I thought the drive-thru was a bad system. I thought everybody struggled at the drive-thru. I thought somebody should have designed it differently, but apparently I was the only one struggling, because I can give people the money just fine. That's not a problem. But then they want to give me the change, and I'm like, ah. They're like, well, turn your hand over. And I'm like, okay. They're like, but you got to reach it out. And I'm like, ah. And they think I'm messing with them because I'm so tall they can't even see my head, so they feel like I should be able to reach in and just take what I want. My sister-in-law said I should get a basket on a stick and just reach it in there, and I'll just put it in the basket. The second best day in my life was the day McDonald's started accepting debit cards, because I've got the tongs. I just don't have the spatula. But it actually gets a little bit worse, because not only can I not turn my hand over, a couple years ago I was training for a marathon. I'd gone 21.5 miles on a 22-mile training run, and I got hit by a truck that was going 50 miles an hour. He hit me in my elbow so hard he didn't break my elbow. He sheared a piece of it off. He chopped a piece of my arm off. And so they took me to the hospital again, and they screwed my left elbow back together. So there's 2 giant screws that go through my elbow and come out the other side. So not only can I not turn my hand over, I can't reach it out all the way. So even though I'm 6'6" and I'm really tall, I'm tall in the same sense that a Tyrannosaurus Rex is tall. I don't have the reach that you'd expect from someone of that height. But the best day in my life. By the way, it is surprising that you might think that the picture with the bathroom was gratuitous earlier. It's not. I've had people come up to me afterwards and grab my arm and try to turn it over. People have a fundamental inability to believe what speakers say. Apparently, so many of them are liars, and people be like, "Give me your arm, give me your arm." And I'm like, ah. And they're like, "It turns over." And I'm like, you got me. It turns over like that. There's a moral to the story, though, and the moral of the story is this: the best day in my life didn't happen in America. The best day in my life happened in Australia, because in Australia they drive on the left-hand side of the road, which means they drive on the right-hand side of the car. And the first place I went to when I drove a car for the first time in Australia was McDonald's. My wife actually has pictures of it, because I wanted to know what it was like to reach my right arm out of the window, nice and flat, and bring the change safely back into the car, like apparently every other human being is doing for all of time. And the moral of that story is really simple. In Australia, my left arm is still broken, my left arm is still damaged, my left arm is still disabled, but it doesn't matter, because I'm in a different situation. I'm in a situation that rewards me for what my right arm can do, and it doesn't matter what my left arm can't do. And that's the power of situations. We can't always change who we are, but we can change where we are. And when we put ourselves in different situations, when we put ourselves in situations that are a better match for who we are, our weaknesses are still there, but they become invisible, and the spotlight comes out and shines directly on our strengths. I'll give you a more extreme example of this if that seems like maybe it might not be true for really serious weaknesses. There's a company called Specialist in Denmark. They do software testing. They hire people with autism on purpose because two of the symptoms of autism are hyperfocus and doing the same thing over and over again. Software testing requires two fundamental abilities, and that's hyperfocus and doing the same thing over and over again. They hire people with autism because the same thing that's a disability in the outside world is a competitive advantage in their world. How many of you ever heard of SAP software, right? It's a global software company. Most mid-sized to giant-sized companies run SAP software to integrate all their different systems. They're currently looking for thousands of people with autism from all over the world to hire them as software testers because the same thing that's a disability, a recognized, acknowledged disability, is a hyperability in that particular context. Michael Phelps is another example of this. He had ADHD, so his mom had a decision to make. My son's hyperactive. How do I get him to behave at school? Should I give him medicine? Or do I help him find a situation that rewards him for who he is? She put him in athletics. He got involved in swimming. And now nobody calls him hyperactive. They call him dedicated. They call him disciplined. They call him determined. He's the person who's won more Olympic medals than anybody in the history of the Olympics. She didn't change who he was, she changed where he was, and by changing where he was, he became incredibly successful using the same thing that would have been an incredible weakness in school. So the question is, how can you find the right fit? And as an entrepreneur, sometimes you don't even have to find the right fit. You can create the right fit in the business that you already have, and we'll talk about how you do that in a second. And one of the ways you do this is by avoidance, to recognize that to be the best at some things, we have to be the worst at other things, to simply stop doing those things that you don't do well, that you're not the best at. How many of you are procrastinators? Raise your hand if you're a procrastinator. Hold on. Look around a little bit to the people who have their hands up. Yeah, the real procrastinators are waiting till later, right? They're like, I'll just do it next time. Probably get another chance. There's probably another round of that, okay? There's lots of books on how to get over procrastination. I don't think you should, because I think procrastination is a big flashing neon sign that tells you this is not your thing. This is not something that you love to do, and this is not something that you could ever be the best at. Don't try to fix procrastination. Embrace it and ask yourself, how can I stop doing forever this thing that I don't like doing? Shaquille O'Neal was one of the best basketball players of all time. He's won 4 NBA championships. He was an all-star every single year, and he was the MVP one of those years. 7'3", 300 pounds. Does anybody know what Shaquille O'Neal was bad at? Foul shots, free throws. He missed more free throws than anybody in the history of the NBA. He wasn't just bad, he's the absolute worst ever in the history of organized basketball. Okay? And yet, if you looked at a list of the top basketball players of all time, he'd be in the top 10 every single time. And that goes against everything we're ever taught. You've got to be well-balanced, got to be well-rounded. You have to at least be good at all the things related to your sport, except it's not true. And the other fact that's really important is he did try to fix it, and people did try to take advantage of it. They called it hack-a-shack, and they fouled him every time he got the ball, and that's when he won 4 NBA championships. The lie that everybody tells you is if you've got big weaknesses, people are going to take advantage of them in order to bring you down, in order to bring your organization down. And in fact, that's not true. The other thing about Shaq is that the reason he was successful is because he was so big. You know why he was so bad at free throws? Because he was so big. There's a physics to shooting a basketball, and if you put a basketball in your hand and you shoot it right, it's going to have the right spin and do the right things, it's going to go in. The problem is Shaquille O'Neal's hand is about this big. And it's like if I gave you a golf ball and I told you to shoot it like a basketball, you'd never be able to do it properly. He was one of the best players of all time because he was big, and he was one of the worst free throw shooters of all time because he was big. This is Matthias Schlitt. His right forearm is 18 inches around. Okay? To put it in context, that's bigger than my neck. Right? His left forearm is only 6 inches around, and there's no muscle really anywhere on the rest of his body. He doesn't have big biceps, he doesn't have a big chest, he doesn't have big back muscles, he doesn't have big leg muscles. The only, it's not a genetic or abnormality, the only muscle that he exercises in his body is his right forearm. I've got some suspicions, and so do you, about how he does that. Let's keep it professional here. We'll talk about that later over drinks. The classic question, though, is what's it going to hurt for him to stop being a freak and to be well-balanced and well-rounded? There's a simple answer to that. He's an arm wrestler. And arm wrestlers wrestle based on weight class. They stand on a scale that weighs their entire body, and then they wrestle against somebody whose entire body weighs the same amount. The problem is the only muscle that helps you, the only muscle you can use in arm wrestling is your right forearm. So what Matthias Schlitt does that's genius is he puts all his muscle where it matters and keeps none of it where he doesn't, and he consistently wrestles people with tiny forearms in comparison to his because they've got a bunch of muscle everywhere else because they'd like to look like normal humans on a day-to-day basis. The problem is looking like a normal human doesn't help you to succeed at arm wrestling. Matthias Schlitt is successful not because of what he does. Everybody exercises their right forearm. Every arm wrestler exercises their right forearm. He's successful because of what he doesn't do, because he doesn't exercise the rest of his body on purpose. So what should you stop doing? Now you're thinking, well, if I don't do it, it has to be done, and that's the last one, which is affiliation. Partner with people who are strong or you're weak. This is Paul Orfalea. He's the other billionaire I wanted to introduce you to. He recently sold Kinko's for $2.4 billion. He says, I think everyone should have dyslexia. But what you have to understand about his story is that he got kicked out of 4 high schools because of his dyslexia. So then, because he couldn't finish high school, he went to 4 different family businesses and worked for his parents and his brothers and sisters, and they all fired him from family-owned businesses because of his dyslexia. So his only choice was to start his own company, which he eventually sold for $2.4 billion. How do you run a company worth $2.4 billion when you cannot read and cannot write? What do? You hire people who can. And something amazing happens when you are willing to, as the CEO, as the founder, to say, I need you because you can do something that I can't do. And because of my dyslexia, I don't have a broken brain, I have a different brain. I can do some things you can't do. So if we partner together, we're going to be successful. We love the idea of partnership. We don't love the idea of admitting what's wrong with us. Right? And there's another thing we don't like. The other thing that we don't like is that sometimes the people we need the most are the people we like the least. Because just like other people take our differences and turn them into weaknesses, we take other people's differences and we turn them into weaknesses as well. And if you're a salesperson, you hate your controller. And if you're a controller, you hate your salespeople. The people who are different from us, the people who do the opposite of us, the people who have a different perspective than us, if you're the global person, you dislike the detail-oriented person. If you're the detail-oriented person, you oftentimes dislike the global and big picture person. My wife is really organized, as we talked about. I call it hiding my stuff. She calls it being organized. And that really frustrates me sometimes and really bothers me. And so it's a real negative oftentimes, but there's also times where it's a positive. I'll be on my wife's on a trip and I'm home with the kids and my kids need a couple AA batteries. I can call up my wife wherever she is and be like, hey, where's the batteries? And she's down the hall, to the right, second shelf. In the back, there's a little tub labeled batteries. I believe in AA. In the back there, we've got 3 Duracell and 2 Energizer. Watch out, because one of them's rechargeable. And at that moment, I'm not mad at my wife for being super organized and hiding my stuff. I'm thinking to myself, I am so hot for you right now. My wife brings something to our relationship that I don't have, and I can look at that 2 ways. I can look at the frustrations and the difficulties that creates, or I can look at the advantages and the possibilities that creates. They're both there. It depends on how I want to look at them. And one of the reasons we fail to benefit from affiliation is because the people that we need the most are the people we like the least. I did this presentation for an EO group in Raleigh. One of the guys asked me to come to his company. When I came to his company, he had 200 people in the room for a conference, and he picked 3 people out of the room that he's basically terrorized for the last however many years that he's run the company. He apologized to them in front of everyone and said, this company wouldn't exist if it wasn't for you 3. I'm sorry that I've given you such a difficult time. It took me a long time to figure out that the people that I liked the least at this company were the people that I needed the most. Affiliation sounds obvious. The problem is we have a really hard time seeing the strength that's hiding inside of other people's weaknesses, and we have a really, really hard time when other people's strengths are the opposites of what ours are. Peter Drucker said organizations exist to make people's strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant. I think families exist to make people's strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant. I think schools should exist to make people's strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant. I think relationships should exist to make people's strengths effective and their weaknesses irrelevant. You got a fellow EOer named Mike Maddock who talks about this in executive circles. He said some people are ringleaders, they're operational, they're detail-oriented, they're systematic, they're good at creating efficiency, and other people are idea monkeys. They're always wanting to try new things and innovate and make changes. He says if you're an idea monkey, don't try to be a ringleader. If you're a ringleader, don't try to be an idea monkey. Don't try to fix what's wrong with you. Don't try to be someone else. Just partner with somebody who has what you don't. He actually recently started a website where if you're a ringleader, you can find an idea monkey, and if you're an idea monkey, you can find a ringleader. The key is don't fix who you are. Find someone to partner with who has what you don't. So who's strong where you're weak? The Leaning Tower of Pisa is broken. It's in the name. It's called the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It was built in 1173. And a little less than 750 years later, a guy named Mussolini, who was the dictator of Italy at the time, decided that this made Italians look like people who couldn't build stuff. And so he decided after 750 years it was time to straighten it up, it was time to fix it, and he ordered his engineers to fix the tower. And they tried, and they actually made it a little bit worse, which was a very lucky thing for the city of Pisa, because millions of people have traveled millions of miles and spent millions of dollars to see what? A tower that leans. And now the people who run the tower say it this way, that because of its inclination, the tower has become the object of very special attention. It's because of our inclinations. In fact, we use that term with children. We use that term with people. That's just their inclination. That's their bent. That's just the way they are. Because of its inclination, the tower has been the object of very special attention. And so now, as they manage the tower, they say this, that it's important to keep the current tilt due to the vital role that this element played in promoting the tourism industry of Pisa. As we walk through life, there's going to be a lot of people who want us to straighten up. And there's going to be temptation to straighten up and to meet those people's expectations. Throughout life, we're going to want our children to straighten up, and we're going to want a spouse to straighten up, and we're going to want employees to straighten up. But that's not where success happens. Success happens when we recognize that it's because of our inclination, because of other people's inclination, that people become the object of very special attention. And it's our job as managers, it's our job as spouses, it's our job as individuals, it's our job as coworkers to keep the current tilt due to the vital role that that plays in our success. E. E. Cummings said, "We do not believe in ourselves until someone reveals that deep inside us something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch." It's my mission in life to help people discover that deep inside of them something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. I hope this has helped you, and I hope you take this message and you share it with your children, you share it with your spouse, you share it with your employees, and you make the world someplace that recognizes, instead of just people's weaknesses, helps people to see that inside of them something is valuable, worth listening to, worthy of our trust, sacred to our touch. What makes us weird also makes us wonderful, and what makes us weak also makes us strong. Thank you very much.